In the scorching heat of 1870s Texas, where the line between civilization and wilderness blurred like mirages on the prairie, a single confession would shatter everything the Whitmore family believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and the true cost of survival. What started as a routine evening in their fortified ranch house would end with revelations that challenged every assumption about the woman who had served them faithfully for 3 years. Margaret Whitmore thought she knew her household staff. She believed she understood the quiet Mexican woman who cleaned their floors, prepared their meals, and tended their wounds with gentle hands that bore mysterious scars. But when Comanche war chief Standing Bear arrived under a flag of truce, demanding answers about his missing daughter, the carefully constructed walls of silence would crumble. What emerged was a story of sacrifice so profound, betrayal so deep, and courage so extraordinary that it would echo through generations. A tale where the line between victim and hero, servant and savior became impossible to draw. In a land where survival often meant making impossible choices, one woman's confession would prove that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest personal cost. The hands that had served the Whitmore family bore more than scars. They carried secrets that could destroy lives, start wars, or perhaps, against all odds, forge an unexpected peace between two worlds that had known only conflict. This is the story of Elena Vasquez, whose whispered confession, "They destroyed my hands for you," would change everything anyone thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The wooden floors of the Whitmore ranch house creaked under Elena Vasquez's bare feet as she moved through the dimly lit hallway, carrying a basin of warm water and clean bandages. The late afternoon sun filtered through the shuttered windows, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts from her past. Elena paused at the door to 12-year-old Mary Whitmore's room, steadying herself before entering. Mary lay on her bed, her small face flushed with fever, her left arm wrapped in bloodied cloth. The child had fallen from her horse that morning, and the deep gash on her forearm needed constant attention. Elena set the basin on the nightstand and began unwrapping the soiled bandages with movements that were both gentle and practiced, though her own hands trembled slightly. "Elena," Mary whispered, her eyes glazed with pain and fever, "your hands feel so cold. Are you all right?" Elena forced a smile, the same reassuring expression she had perfected over the past 3 years of working for the Whitmore family. "Sure, little one. I am fine. We must clean your wound properly, or it will become infected." As Elena cleaned the girl's injury, Mary's curious eyes focused on the Mexican woman's scarred hands. The child had asked about those scars before, but Elena had always deflected the questions with gentle changes of subject or sudden tasks that required immediate attention. Today, however, Mary's feverish state made her more persistent. "Elena, were you hurt badly when you were young? Your hands have so many marks." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The scars that covered her palms and fingers were not random marks of childhood accidents or kitchen burns. They told a story of deliberate cruelty, of choices made in desperation, of a sacrifice so profound that even 3 years later, the memory could make her hands shake with remembered agony. "Some old wounds, child. Nothing for you to worry about." Elena's voice was steady, but inside, her heart raced with the familiar panic that came whenever anyone looked too closely at the evidence of her past. The sound of horses approaching at full gallop interrupted the quiet afternoon. Elena moved to the window and peered through the wooden slats. What she saw made her blood run cold. A group of Comanche warriors had stopped at the edge of the property, just beyond the main gate. They sat motionless on their horses, painted for war, but carrying a white flag of truce. Elena's hands began to shake uncontrollably as she recognized the lead rider. Even at this distance, even after 3 years, she knew that proud bearing, that distinctive war bonnet, that magnificent spotted horse. Standing Bear, the Comanche war chief, who had reasons to hate the Whitmore family that went far deeper than simple territorial disputes. "Elena, what's wrong?" Mary's weak voice pulled her back to the present. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, Elena had. Standing bare represented everything she had tried to leave behind, every choice she had made to protect this family, every secret she had buried in her heart. His presence here could only mean one thing. He had finally discovered where his daughter had gone. Elena forced herself to continue tending to Mary's wound, but her hands shook so badly that she nearly dropped the bandages. She could hear commotion downstairs as the Whitmore family became aware of their unexpected visitors. James Whitmore's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with tension and authority. Margaret, get the children away from the windows. Tom, bring my rifle. Elena closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She had always known this day might come. For 3 years, she had lived with the knowledge that her carefully constructed new life could crumble at any moment. She had watched Mary and her siblings grow, had become part of this family's daily rhythm, had found a kind of peace in the simple routines of cooking, cleaning, and caring for others. But peace had always been borrowed time for Elena Vasquez. She was a woman living under a false identity, harboring secrets that could destroy the people who had shown her kindness and given her shelter. The approaching confrontation would force her to choose between her own safety and the truth that could save or damn them all. Elena, Mary grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for a sick child. You're scaring me. What's happening? Elena looked down at the brave little girl who reminded her so much of another child, one whose fate had set all of these events in motion. Mary's trust and innocence cut through Elena's heart like a knife. This child deserved protection, deserved to grow up safe and loved, deserved to never know the kind of pain that had shaped Elena's life. Nothing you need to fear, little one, Elena whispered, though she wondered if she was telling the truth. Your papa will handle everything. Through the floorboards, Elena could hear James Whitmore's boots as he made his way to the front door. She knew he was a good man, fair in his dealings with the Mexican families who worked his land, generous with food during hard times, protective of his family and workers alike. But James Whitmore had secrets of his own, decisions made 3 years ago that he believed would never catch up with him. Elena finished bandaging Mary's arm and tucked the blankets around the child's shoulders. Rest now. I must go help your mother with your brothers. As she started toward the door, Mary called out weakly, Elena, promise me you won't leave us. Promise you'll stay and keep us safe. Elena paused at the threshold, her hand on the door frame. The child's innocent request hit her like a physical blow. How could she promise something that might be impossible to deliver? How could she explain that sometimes keeping people safe required making choices that seemed like betrayal? I will do everything in my power to protect you, Elena said finally. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the promise Mary wanted to hear. Elena made her way downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The main floor of the house buzzed with tense activity. Margaret Whitmore was ushering 8-year-old Samuel and 6-year-old Rebecca toward the back bedrooms while Tom, the eldest son at 16, stood by the window with his father's spare rifle. Elena. Margaret's voice was sharp with stress. Take the children to the root cellar. If there's trouble, you know what to do. Elena nodded, but she knew she wouldn't be hiding in any cellar today. Standing Bear had not ridden here for a random raid or cattle theft. He had come for answers about his daughter, and Elena was the only person who could provide them. She was also the only person who truly understood what those answers would cost. James Whitmore straightened his vest and checked his pistol one final time before opening the front door. Elena positioned herself where she could see and hear everything while remaining partially hidden behind the kitchen doorway. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the Comanche war chief dismounted and walked toward the house with the measured pace of a man who had nothing to fear and everything to gain. Standing Bear was exactly as Elena remembered him, tall and powerfully built, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing and a presence that commanded respect even from his enemies. He wore traditional Comanche clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and his war paint told the story of his victories and losses. But Elena knew that beneath that fearsome exterior was a father's heart, broken by the loss of his daughter. James Whitmore, Standing Bear's voice carried clearly in the still afternoon air. I come under the white flag, but not in friendship. I come seeking truth about my daughter, Morningstar. Elena's breath caught. He had said the name she had not heard spoken aloud in 3 years. Morningstar, the beautiful 16-year-old Comanche girl who had been caught in the crossfire of two worlds at war, whose fate had led Elena down a path of choices that still haunted her dreams. James Whitmore's face remained carefully neutral. I know nothing about your daughter, Standing Bear. You and your people haven't been welcome on this land for good reason. The lie came easily to James, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. He knew exactly what Standing Bear was talking about. They all did. Standing Bear's eyes narrowed. 3 years ago, my daughter disappeared from our winter camp. Tracks led toward this ranch. She was never seen again among our people. Many things happen on the plains, James replied carefully. Wild animals, accidents, other tribes passing through. I can't be responsible for every missing person in Texas. Elena watched this dangerous dance of half-truths and deflection, knowing that both men were circling around a truth that could explode into violence at any moment. Standing Bear had not come here on a whim or based on idle suspicion. Somehow, he had learned something that had led him directly to the Whitmore Ranch. I have new information, Standing Bear said, his voice carrying a note of barely controlled anger. A trader who passed through told me of a Mexican woman who works for you. A woman with scars on her hands who speaks both Spanish and Comanche. A woman who appeared on your land 3 years ago, at the same time my daughter vanished. Elena's knees nearly buckled. The net was closing. Someone had finally connected the pieces, had seen through the carefully constructed story of Elena Vasquez, the widowed Mexican woman seeking honest work on a Texas ranch. Her past was catching up with her, and she would have to decide how much truth she was willing to reveal to save the people who had become her family. Margaret Whitmore appeared beside her husband, her face pale but determined. We don't know anything about your daughter. Elena is a good woman who has worked for us faithfully. We won't let you intimidate her or our family. Elena felt a stab of guilt at Margaret's protective words. This woman was defending her based on 3 years of loyal service, not knowing that Elena's presence in their home was built on a foundation of secrets that could destroy them all. Standing Bear's gaze swept the ranch house, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to look directly at Elena through the kitchen doorway. Then, let me speak to this Mexican woman. Let her tell me with her own words that she knows nothing of my daughter. Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The scars on her palms and fingers ached with remembered pain. She thought of Mary upstairs, trusting and innocent, fighting a fever and counting on Elena to keep her safe. She thought of Samuel and Rebecca, hiding in the back rooms, depending on the adults to protect them from a world that could be cruel beyond imagination. Most of all, she thought of Morningstar, the beautiful Comanche girl whose fate had set all of these events in motion. Standing Bear deserved to know what had happened to his daughter. But the truth would shatter more than one family. Elena stepped forward from the kitchen doorway, her scarred hands visible in the afternoon light streaming through the open door. I am Elena Vasquez, she said in clear English, then repeated it in Comanche. I will speak with Standing Bear. The war chief's eyes locked onto her scarred hands, and she saw recognition flicker across his features. He had seen those particular scars before, had perhaps even been present when they were inflicted. Elena's cover was blown, her carefully maintained identity crumbling in the space of a single moment. I know you, Standing Bear said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and growing understanding. You're not just Elena Vasquez. Elena lifted her chin with dignity despite her fear. No, I am not just Elena Vasquez. James Whitmore looked back, and forth between them, confusion and dawning alarm crossing his features. Elena, what is he talking about? How does he know you? Elena met Standing Bear's eyes directly, seeing in them the same mixture of hope and dread that she felt in her own heart. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for since the day she had arrived at the Whitmore Ranch. The moment when all her carefully guarded secrets would finally come to light. Perhaps, Elena said quietly, it is time for the truth. Elena stepped fully into the doorway, her scarred hands trembling as she faced the Comanche war chief who had haunted her dreams for 3 years. Standing Bear's eyes never left her face, and she could see the wheels of memory turning in his mind as he placed her in a different context, a different time, a different world. You were at Fort Richardson, Standing Bear said slowly, his voice heavy with recognition and growing anger. You were there when they brought my daughter. James Whitmore's face went white. Margaret gasped and stepped closer to her husband. The carefully maintained fiction that had protected them all was crumbling with each word. Elena nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I was there. Elena, James's voice was sharp with warning. Think carefully about what you're about to say. But Elena was beyond thinking carefully. She was beyond protecting comfortable lies and convenient silence. Standing Bear deserved to know what had happened to his daughter, and the Whitmore family deserved to understand the true cost of the choices they had all made 3 years ago. My real name is Elena Sandoval, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. 3 years ago, I worked as a translator and nurse at Fort Richardson. I spoke English, Spanish, and Comanche. When captured Indians were brought to the fort, I helped with interrogations and medical treatment. Standing Bear's jaw tightened. You helped the army extract information from my people. I helped wounded people survive, Elena corrected firmly, regardless of which side they were on. It was my job, and I tried to do it with compassion. Margaret Whitmore moved closer to the conversation, her protective instincts for her employee warring with her growing confusion about Elena's true identity. I don't understand. Elena, you told us your husband died, and you needed work. You said you had experience caring for children and managing a household. Elena's smile was sad and bitter. All of that was true, Mrs. Whitmore. My husband did die, killed in a Comanche raid 2 years before I came to work for you. I did have experience with children and household management, but I also had other experiences that I chose not to share. Standing Bear stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Tell me about my daughter. Tell me what happened to Morningstar. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to reveal the truth that had burned inside her for so long. When she opened them again, her gaze was direct and unflinching. Morningstar was brought to Fort Richardson in December of 1871. She had been captured during a patrol sweep of the Llano Estacado. She was wounded, badly malnourished, and terrified. She was a warrior's daughter, Standing Bear said proudly. She would not have shown fear to her enemies. She was a 16-year-old girl who had been separated from everything and everyone she had ever known, Elena replied gently. And she was pregnant. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Standing Bear's face went through a series of emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, a deep sadness that transformed his fierce features. Pregnant, he repeated slowly. About 6 months along, Elena confirmed. The patrol that captured her had no idea. They treated her like any other prisoner, which meant she received minimal medical care and poor nutrition. By the time she reached the fort, both she and the baby were in serious danger. James Whitmore found his voice again. Elena, please. You don't need to tell him everything. Elena turned to face her employer, and for the first time in 3 years, there was steel in her voice. Don't I, Mr. Whitmore? Don't I need to tell a father what happened to his child? Don't I need to explain why I carry these scars on my hands? Don't I need to tell him about the choices we all made that winter? Standing Bear's attention focused on Elena's scarred hands with laser intensity. Tell me about the scars. Elena held up her hands, displaying the intricate pattern of old wounds that covered her palms and fingers. In the afternoon sunlight, the scars were clearly visible, precise, deliberate marks that spoke of intentional injury rather than accident. The commanding officer of Fort Richardson was Colonel Marcus Bledsoe, Elena began, her voice steady despite the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. He believed that the only way to deal with the Comanche problem was through overwhelming force and psychological warfare. When he learned that Morningstar was the daughter of a war chief, he saw an opportunity. Elena paused, looking directly at Standing Bear. He wanted information about winter camps, about planned raids, about the location of other tribal leaders. He believed that Morningstar could provide that information. "My daughter would never betray her people," Standing Bear said fiercely. "No," Elena agreed. "She wouldn't." And Colonel Bledsoe quickly realized that traditional interrogation methods weren't going to work. So he decided to try a different approach. Elena's hands began to shake as the memories flooded back. He knew that Morningstar was pregnant. He knew she was weakening from poor nutrition and inadequate medical care. And he knew that I had developed a rapport with her because I could speak her language and had been treating her injuries. Margaret Whitmore was staring at Elena with growing horror. "Oh my God, Elena, what did he make you do?" "He offered Morningstar a choice," Elena continued, her voice now barely audible. She could provide the information he wanted about Comanche positions and plans, or she could watch as they tortured someone she had come to trust. The pieces were falling into place, and Standing Bear's face was a mask of controlled rage. "You," Elena nodded. "He told Morningstar that they would torture me until she talked. They started with my hands because she had watched me tend to her wounds with those hands. She had seen me prepare food for her with those hands. Those hands represented kindness and care in a place where she had found little of either." Elena spread her fingers, showing the precise pattern of scars. "They used heated knives, small cuts made slowly and deliberately while Morningstar was forced to watch." Colonel Bledsoe was very methodical about it. He explained exactly what he was doing and why, making sure she understood that every moment of my pain was her choice to endure. Standing Bear's fists clenched at his sides. "How long?" "3 days," Elena whispered. 3 days of small cuts and burns, always on my hands where she could see them clearly. They were careful not to cause permanent damage to my ability to function, but the pain was... Elena's voice broke slightly. The pain was beyond description. James Whitmore had gone pale as death. "Jesus Christ, Elena, you never told us any of this." "There was more," Elena continued, looking at Standing Bear. "On the 4th day, Morningstar went into early labor. The stress of watching the torture, combined with her poor health and inadequate nutrition, triggered premature birth." Elena's voice became clinical, as if she were reporting medical facts rather than reliving a nightmare. "I was the only person at the fort with any experience as a midwife. Despite my injured hands, I was brought in to help deliver the baby." Standing Bear's voice was hoarse with emotion. "The child, a boy," Elena said softly. "Beautiful, but too small, too early. He lived for 6 hours." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could hear the wind moving through the cottonwood trees, the distant lowing of cattle, the normal sounds of ranch life continuing despite the fact that her world was falling apart. "Morningstar held him for those 6 hours," Elena continued. "She sang to him in Comanche, songs I didn't understand, but that I could feel in my heart. She told him about his grandfather, about the people he would never know, about the life he would never live." Elena wiped tears from her cheeks with the backs of her scarred hands. "When he died, something in Morningstar broke. She had endured torture, captivity, and humiliation with courage and dignity. But losing her son destroyed her will to live." Standing Bear's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened to her?" "She stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped speaking. Within a week, she was dead." The raw pain in Elena's voice was matched by the agony in Standing Bear's eyes. He had come here seeking answers about his daughter's fate, but the truth was more horrible than anything he could have imagined. "But this doesn't explain how you came to work for the Whitmores," Standing Bear said finally, his voice thick with grief and barely controlled rage. "This doesn't explain why you are here, on this ranch, 3 years later." Elena looked at James Whitmore, who had remained silent during her confession. His face was gray with shock and what looked like guilt. "Mr. Whitmore," knows that part of the story. All eyes turned to James, who seemed to age 10 years in the space of a few moments. Elena came to us in the spring of 1872. She was seeking work, and she had excellent references from the fort's medical staff. We needed help with the children and the household, and she seemed like a godsend. That's not the whole truth, Elena said quietly. Tell him the rest, Mr. Whitmore. James Whitmore looked at his wife, then at Standing Bear, then back at Elena. Colonel Bledsoe had been reassigned after several incidents with prisoner treatment came to light. Elena was in danger because she had witnessed things that could have ended his military career. Elena nodded. I knew too much about his methods. I had seen him torture prisoners, had participated under duress in interrogations that violated military regulations. I was a liability to him and the officers who had supported his approach. Margaret Whitmore was staring at her husband with growing understanding and horror. James, you knew about this? You knew what had happened to her. I knew she was in danger, James admitted. I knew she needed protection and a place to disappear. When she agreed to change her name and come work for us, it seemed like the right thing to do. Elena's voice was bitter with remembered fear. I needed to disappear completely. Elena Sandoval had seen too much, knew too much, posed too much of a threat to powerful men who value their reputations more than their honor. Elena Vasquez was a fiction, but she was a fiction that allowed me to survive. Standing Bear had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. So you created a new identity for her. You gave her shelter and work in exchange for her silence about what happened at Fort Richardson. James nodded reluctantly. In part, yes, but it wasn't just about silence. Elena needed protection, and we needed help. It seemed like an arrangement that benefited everyone. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Benefited everyone except Morningstar, except the unnamed son who died in my arms, except the other prisoners who suffered under Colonel Bledsoe's methods. Standing Bear stepped closer to Elena, his eyes boring into hers. You could have escaped. You could have run rather than endure the torture. Why did you stay? Why did you let them destroy your hands? Elena met his gaze steadily. Because Morningstar reminded me of my sister, who was also captured by soldiers when I was young. Because she was pregnant and alone and terrified. Because someone needed to show her that not all white people were monsters. Elena held up her scarred hands again. And because I thought that if I endured enough pain, if I showed her that someone was willing to suffer for her, she might find the strength to survive. Her voice broke completely. I was wrong. My sacrifice didn't save her. It didn't save her baby. All it did was leave me with scars and memories that haunt me every day. Standing Bear studied Elena's face for a long moment, seeing past the fear and guilt to something else underneath. You loved her. Like a daughter, Elena whispered. In those horrible weeks at the fort, she became the daughter I never had. And I failed her completely. Standing Bear's next words shocked everyone present. No, you did not fail her. Elena looked up in surprise. How can you say that? She died. Her baby died. I couldn't save either of them. Standing Bear's voice was heavy with emotion, but also with something that might have been gratitude. You stayed with her when no one else would. You suffered for her when no one else cared. You held her son when he died, and you gave him the only kindness he would ever know. The war chief's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That is not failure. That is love. Standing Bear's unexpected words of understanding hung in the air like a blessing Elena had never thought she would receive. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of what she perceived as her failure to save Morningstar and her child. To hear the girl's father acknowledge her love and sacrifice was both healing and heartbreaking. But Elena knew that the revelation of the truth would have consequences that reached far beyond her own emotional wounds. Standing Bear had come here seeking answers, and those answers would demand a response. The war chief's grief was now coupled with rage at those responsible for his daughter's death, and the Whitmore family had unknowingly placed themselves in the center of that storm. There's more to this story, Elena said quietly, seeing the dangerous calm in Standing Bear's eyes. More that you need to know before you decide what justice looks like. Margaret Whitmore had been standing in shocked silence, absorbing the revelation that her trusted household manager was not who she appeared to be. Now she stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her confusion and fear. Elena, regardless of what happened in your past, you've been like family to us for 3 years. You've cared for our children, shared our meals, been a part of our daily lives. Nothing you've told us changes that. Elena felt a stab of guilt at Margaret's loyalty. This woman was defending her based on 3 years of faithful service, not knowing that Elena's presence in their home had also made them targets of Standing Bear's quest for justice. Mrs. Whitmore, Elena said gently, your kindness means more to me than you could ever know. But my presence here has put your family in danger. Standing Bear didn't come here by accident. He came here because someone told him that the woman who witnessed his daughter's death was living on the Whitmore ranch. James Whitmore's face went pale. Elena, what are you saying? I'm saying that protecting me has made you enemies. Colonel Bledsoe was reassigned, but he wasn't court-martialed. He wasn't prosecuted for his treatment of prisoners. He was quietly moved to a different post where he could continue his career without the inconvenience of witnesses to his methods. Elena turned to Standing Bear. The colonel has been looking for me for 3 years. He knows that I could expose his crimes if I ever decided to speak publicly about what I witnessed at Fort Richardson. My testimony could end his military career and potentially land him in prison. Standing Bear's eyes narrowed. And he has finally found you. Elena nodded grimly. 3 days ago, a stranger came through town asking questions about Mexican women working on local ranches. He was particularly interested in women with scars on their hands. Tom Whitmore was in town and overheard the conversation. James looked at his eldest son, who had been standing guard by the window with increasing tension. Tom, why didn't you tell us about this? Tom Whitmore, 16 and trying to shoulder adult responsibilities, looked miserable. I thought I could handle it myself, Pa. I followed the man to the hotel and listened outside his room. He was sending a telegram to someone, reporting that he had found the woman they were looking for. Elena's hands clenched into fists. The telegram was to Colonel Bledsoe. I'm certain of it. He's been systematically searching for me, and now he knows exactly where I am. Margaret's voice was sharp with alarm. What does this mean for our family? It means that Colonel Bledsoe will be here soon, Elena said simply. And he won't come alone. He can't afford to let me tell my story, and he can't afford to let anyone who has protected me continue to pose a threat to his reputation. Standing Bear had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. You're saying that this army officer is coming here to silence you permanently. I'm saying that everyone in this house is now at risk because they showed kindness to someone who knew too much about powerful men's crimes, Elena replied. James Whitmore ran his hands through his hair, the weight of the situation clearly overwhelming him. Elena, if we had known the extent of the danger you were in, if we had understood what protecting you might cost. Elena's voice was firm. You would have done exactly what you did. You would have offered shelter to someone who needed it. That's who you are, Mr. Whitmore. That's who your family is. I won't let you regret your compassion. Standing Bear stepped closer to the family group, his presence commanding attention. But now we have a situation that requires immediate action. Your enemy is also my enemy. The man who tortured my daughter and drove her to death is coming here to harm the woman who tried to save her. Margaret looked back and forth between Standing Bear and Elena. I don't understand. Are you saying that you won't seek revenge against us for what happened to your daughter? Standing Bear's voice was heavy with pain, but clear in its conviction. Elena Sandoval did not kill my daughter. Colonel Marcus Bledsoe killed my daughter. Elena suffered torture trying to save her. The Whitmore family gave Elena sanctuary when she needed protection. He paused, looking directly at James. You are not my enemies, but we share the same enemy now. Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Standing Bear, you can't get involved in this. If Colonel Bledsoe arrives and finds Comanche warriors on the Whitmore ranch, he'll use that as justification for any action he takes. He'll claim he was defending a white family from Indian attack. Then, We must be clever about how we handle this, Standing Bear replied. How long before this colonel arrives? Tom spoke up from his position by the window. The man in town said something about meeting his commanding officer in 3 days. That was yesterday, so I guess they'll be here tomorrow or the day after. Elena's mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. He'll come with enough men to handle any resistance. He'll have official orders that justify his presence here. And he'll have a story prepared to explain anything that happens. James found his voice again. What kind of story? Elena's smile was bitter. Perhaps that he received reports of a dangerous fugitive hiding on a local ranch, or that he was investigating rumors of stolen military supplies, or that he had information about Comanche raiders in the area. Colonel Bledsoe is very creative when it comes to justifying his actions. Margaret moved closer to her husband, her face set with determination. Then, we need to be just as creative. Elena, you've been part of our family for 3 years. We won't abandon you now. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at Margaret's fierce loyalty. Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate your sentiment, but you have children to protect. You can't risk their lives for someone who has already lived with the consequences of her choices. It's not just about you anymore, James said firmly. If this colonel is willing to kill to protect his reputation, then he's a threat to anyone who might have learned your story. We've heard everything you've told us today. We're witnesses now, too. Standing Bear nodded approvingly. Your husband speaks wisdom. Running away will not solve this problem. It will only delay the reckoning. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. The Whitmore family who had given her shelter and purpose, and the Comanche war chief who had every reason to hate her, but had instead offered understanding and alliance. For 3 years, she had carried her burdens alone. Now, suddenly, she had people willing to stand with her. If we're going to face Colonel Bledsoe together, Elena said slowly, then we need to understand exactly what we're up against. And we need a plan that protects everyone, especially the children. Standing Bear's eyes glittered with something that might have been anticipation. Tell me about this colonel's methods. Tell me how he thinks, how he operates, what he values most. Elena thought back to her months at Fort Richardson, remembering the man who had ordered her torture with the same casual authority he might use to order supplies or assign duties. Colonel Bledsoe is intelligent, ambitious, and completely without mercy when he perceives a threat to his career. He believes that the ends justify any means, and he has no respect for regulations or laws that interfere with his objectives. She paused, organizing her thoughts. But he's also arrogant. He believes that his rank and position make him untouchable. He would never expect resistance from a Mexican woman, a rancher family, and a Comanche war chief working together. James leaned forward. What do you think his plan will be when he arrives here? Simple and direct, Elena replied. He'll come with enough soldiers to overwhelm any resistance. He'll present official orders that require my immediate surrender. If you refuse to cooperate, he'll arrest you for harboring a fugitive or aiding military desertion or any number of charges he can fabricate. Elena's voice hardened. And if I resist, or if anyone tries to protect me, there will be an unfortunate accident. Perhaps I'll be shot while attempting to escape. Perhaps the ranch house will catch fire during a struggle. Colonel Bledsoe is very good at creating situations where his desired outcome seems justified and inevitable. Margaret shuddered. How can an officer in the United States Army behave like that? Because the Army needs men who can win battles in hostile territory, Elena explained. Colonel Bledsoe's methods produce results. His superiors don't ask too many questions about his techniques as long as he continues to be effective against Indian resistance. Standing Bear's voice was low and dangerous. Then, it is time for someone to ask questions he cannot answer. Elena looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Standing Bear smiled, and there was nothing friendly about the expression. I mean that Colonel Marcus Bledsoe has never faced an enemy who knows his true nature and has nothing to lose. He has never been forced to answer for his crimes to people who are beyond his reach or intimidation. Elena felt a chill of both hope and fear. Standing Bear, Whatever you're thinking, it can't involve violence against U.S. military personnel. That would bring down retribution on your entire people. Who said anything about violence? Standing Bear's smile became even more predatory. There are many ways to destroy a man, like Colonel Bledsoe. Violence is the least creative and least permanent of those ways. James looked between Elena and Standing Bear with growing understanding. You're talking about exposing his crimes, using Elena's testimony to destroy his career and reputation. I'm talking about ensuring that Colonel Marcus Bledsoe faces justice for what he did to my daughter and to Elena and to all the other prisoners who suffered under his methods, Standing Bear corrected. And I'm talking about doing it in a way that protects this family and ensures that he can never hurt anyone else. Elena felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope for actual justice rather than simple survival. It would be dangerous. It would require careful planning. And it would mean revealing everything I've hidden for 3 years. Margaret reached out and took Elena's scarred hand in both of hers. Then, it's a good thing you won't be facing it alone. The plan they devised over the next 18 hours was intricate, dangerous, and completely dependent on timing and trust between people who had been strangers or enemies just days before. Elena found herself at the center of an unlikely alliance that included the Whitmore family, Standing Bear, and 2 other Comanche warriors who had arrived under cover of darkness. As the sun rose on what would likely be the most important day of her life since Morning Star's death, Elena stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore ranch house, preparing what might be her final meal in the only home she had known for 3 years. Her hands, despite their scars, moved with practiced efficiency as she ground coffee beans and sliced bread, finding comfort in the familiar routines that had anchored her through so much uncertainty. Mary Whitmore appeared in the doorway, her fever finally broken, but her face still pale from her illness. "Elena, why is everyone acting so strange? Papa has been cleaning his guns all night, and Mama keeps hugging us like we're going away somewhere." Elena knelt beside the 12-year-old girl who had become so dear to her, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes grown-ups have to handle difficult situations, little one. Your parents are just making sure everyone stays safe." Mary's observant eyes studied Elena's face. "It's about those men on horseback yesterday, isn't it? The Indians who came to talk to Papa." Elena was constantly amazed by how much children noticed and understood, even when adults try to shield them from harsh realities. "Yes, partly. But it's also about some bad men who might come today. Men who want to hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt." Mary reached out and touched one of the scars on Elena's hand. "Men like the ones who hurt you before?" Elena's breath caught. "How did you—" "I'm not stupid, Elena. I know those aren't cooking burns or accident marks. Someone hurt you on purpose, and now they're coming back to hurt you again." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the child's perception and compassion. "Yes, Mary. Someone hurt me a long time ago, and now I have to face them again. But this time, I'm not alone." Mary nodded solemnly. "Good. You shouldn't have to face bad people by yourself." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Elena moved to the window and peered through the shutters, her heart sinking as she counted the riders. Colonel Marcus Bledsoe had arrived with 8 soldiers, exactly as she had predicted. They were approaching under official military colors, with the confident bearing of men who believe themselves to be operating under lawful authority. "Mary, go to your mother," Elena said quietly. "Tell her they're here." As Mary ran to alert her parents, Elena took a deep breath and prepared to face the man who had ordered her torture 3 years ago. Everything depended on the next few hours playing out exactly as they had planned. Colonel Bledsoe looked exactly as Elena remembered him, tall, distinguished, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He rode at the head of his small column with the bearing of a man accustomed to command and obedience. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, his expression that of a professional soldier carrying out unpleasant but necessary duties. Elena positioned herself in the kitchen where she could observe everything while remaining hidden from immediate view. James and Margaret Whitmore took their places on the front porch, presenting a united front while their children were safely secured in the back rooms with Tom standing guard. Colonel Bledsoe dismounted and approached the house with measured steps. "Mr. Whitmore, I am Colonel Marcus Bledsoe, United States Army. I have reason to believe you are harboring a fugitive from military justice. I must insist that you surrender this individual immediately." James stepped forward, his voice carefully neutral. "Colonel, I'm not sure what you're talking about. My family and I are law-abiding citizens. We have no fugitives here." Bledsoe's smile was thin and humorless. "Mr. Whitmore, we both know that's not true. You have been sheltering a woman named Elena Sandoval for the past 3 years. She is wanted for questioning in connection with theft of military supplies and conspiracy to aid enemy forces." Elena felt a surge of rage at the casual lies rolling off Bledsoe's tongue. He was already constructing the narrative that would justify whatever actions he planned to take. Margaret found her voice, showing the steel that Elena had come to admire over their years together. "Colonel, the woman who works for us is named Elena Vasquez, and she's been nothing but honest and hardworking in all the time we've known her." "I'm sure she has been," Bledsoe replied smoothly. "Unfortunately, she has also been living under a false identity to avoid facing charges for serious crimes against the United States military." James stepped closer to the edge of the porch. "What kind of charges?" Bledsoe's voice took on the tone of a man delivering regrettable but necessary news. "Theft of medical supplies, conspiracy to provide aid to hostile Indian forces, and desertion from her position as a military contractor. Serious charges that carry significant penalties." Elena listened to this recital of fabricated crimes with growing anger. Every charge was a lie designed to justify her arrest and probable execution. Bledsoe was creating a story that would allow him to eliminate her while appearing to uphold military justice. "I find that hard to believe," James said firmly. "Elena has been nothing but loyal and trustworthy in her service to our family." Bledsoe's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate your loyalty to your employee, but you are interfering with a military investigation. I must insist that you produce Elena Sandoval immediately, or I will be forced to search your property and arrest anyone who attempts to obstruct justice." This was the moment they had been waiting for. Elena stepped out of the kitchen and onto the front porch, presenting herself with dignity despite her fear. "I am Elena Sandoval. I am here." Bledsoe's eyes locked onto her immediately, and she saw a flicker of satisfaction cross his features. After 3 years of searching, he had finally cornered his prey. "Miss Sandoval, you're under arrest for crimes against the United States military. You will come with us immediately." Elena lifted her chin. "I would like to know the specific charges against me, Colonel. And I would like to understand why you have come so far to arrest one woman for what you claim are routine military infractions." Bledsoe's eyes narrowed. "The charges are theft of government property, conspiracy to aid enemy forces, and desertion of assigned duties. As for why I have come personally, let's simply say that your case requires special attention." Elena smiled grimly. "Special attention because I witnessed things at Fort Richardson that certain officers would prefer to remain hidden." For the first time, Bledsoe's composed facade cracked slightly. "I don't know what you think you witnessed, Miss Sandoval, but I assure you that any allegations you might make would be the desperate lies of a woman facing serious criminal charges." "Would they?" Elena asked. "Even if those allegations were supported by detailed medical records of the injuries inflicted on Comanche prisoners? Even if they were corroborated by other witnesses who were present during interrogations?" Bledsoe's face went pale. "There are no such records, and there are no other witnesses." Elena's smile was cold. "Are you certain of that, Colonel?" Before Bledsoe could respond, Standing Bear emerged from behind the ranch house, flanked by his 2 warriors. They moved with the silent grace of men comfortable with violence, but currently committed to a different kind of warfare. Bledsoe's hand immediately moved to his sidearm. Mr. Whitmore, you failed to mention that you were hosting hostile Indians on your property. James stepped between Bledsoe and Standing Bear. These men came here under a flag of truce, Colonel. They are not hostile unless they are threatened. Standing Bear's voice carried clearly across the yard. I am Standing Bear of the Comanche Nation. I came here seeking truth about my daughter, Morning Star, who died at Fort Richardson 3 years ago. Bledsoe's face went completely white. I don't know anything about your daughter. Don't you? Standing Bear's voice was deceptively calm. Then, perhaps you would be interested to know that I have detailed testimony about her treatment while she was a prisoner at your fort. Testimony that describes how she was tortured, how her unborn child was killed through deliberate medical neglect, and how she was driven to suicide by the cruelty she witnessed and endured. Bledsoe looked around frantically, clearly realizing that the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. Whatever lies you've been told, I can assure you that all prisoners at Fort Richardson were treated according to military regulations. Elena stepped forward again, including the pregnant 16-year-old girl who was forced to watch as your men slowly destroyed my hands with heated knives. Bledsoe's composure finally shattered completely. You have no proof of any of this. And even if you did, the word of a Mexican woman and a savage Indian would carry no weight against the testimony of a decorated Army officer. Standing Bear's smile was predatory. Perhaps not. But what about the word of a decorated Army officer who was present during those interrogations and has finally decided that his conscience will no longer allow him to remain silent? A new voice spoke from behind Bledsoe's soldiers. Hello, Marcus. It's been a long time. Bledsoe spun around to see a tall, graying man in a major's uniform approaching from the direction of the main road. Elena recognized him immediately. Major William Harrison, the post surgeon from Fort Richardson who had treated her injuries after each torture session. William. Bledsoe's voice was strangled with shock. What are you doing here? Major Harrison's face was grim with determination. I'm here to ensure that the truth about Fort Richardson finally comes to light. Marcus, I'm here to make sure that Elena Sandoval and Standing Bear get the justice they deserve. Elena felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of her memories alone, believing that no one with authority or credibility would ever be willing to corroborate her story. The arrival of Major Harrison changed everything. I've been following your search for Miss Sandoval, Harrison continued. I've been waiting for the right moment to act. When I learned that you had finally tracked her down, I knew that moment had come. Bledsoe looked around desperately, realizing that his carefully planned operation had become a trap. William, you don't understand. This woman is a security risk. She could undermine military operations across the entire frontier. By telling the truth about war crimes, Harrison asked quietly, by exposing the torture and murder of prisoners, by revealing that you ordered the deaths of pregnant women and unborn children in the name of military necessity. Harrison turned to address Bledsoe's soldiers, his voice carrying the authority of his rank and years of service. Gentlemen, I am placing Colonel Marcus Bledsoe under arrest for war crimes, violation of military regulations regarding prisoner treatment, and conspiracy to murder military witnesses. Elena watched as Bledsoe's carefully constructed world crumbled around him. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was suddenly just another criminal facing the consequences of his actions. But she also knew that this confrontation was far from over. Bledsoe was trapped, but trapped animals were often at their most dangerous. The standoff in the ranch yard lasted only moments, but Elena felt as though the entire weight of the past 3 years hung in the balance. Colonel Bledsoe stood surrounded by his own soldiers, who were now looking uncertainly between their commanding officer and Major Harrison, clearly unsure of their loyalties and obligations. Bledsoe's hand remained on his sidearm, his eyes darting between Elena, Standing Bear, and Major Harrison as he calculated his rapidly diminishing options. Elena could see the desperation building in his expression as he realized that his carefully planned operation to eliminate witnesses had become a public exposure of his crimes. "William," Bledsoe said, his voice taking on a tone of forced reasonableness, "you're making a serious mistake. These people have filled your head with lies and propaganda designed to undermine military authority. Elena Sandoval is a known conspirator with hostile forces." Major Harrison's voice was steady and implacable. "Marcus, I was there. I saw what you did to that girl and her baby. I treated Elena's injuries after each torture session. I documented everything in medical records that I've kept secure for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to act." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward the army surgeon who had shown her kindness during the darkest period of her life. She remembered his gentle hands treating her wounds, his quiet words of comfort, his obvious struggle with being forced to participate in Bledsoe's brutal methods. Standing Bear stepped forward, his presence commanding attention from everyone in the yard. "Major Harrison, I am grateful for your courage in speaking the truth. But I want to hear from Colonel Bledsoe himself. I want him to acknowledge what he did to my daughter." Bledsoe's facade of military composure cracked completely. "Your daughter was a prisoner of war who died due to complications for childbirth. Nothing more. Any suggestion that she was mistreated is enemy propaganda designed to undermine confidence in military operations." Elena's anger flared at this continued denial. "Complications from childbirth? She was tortured into premature labor. She was starved and neglected until her body couldn't sustain her pregnancy. She died of despair after watching her infant son die in my arms." Bledsoe spun toward Elena, his hand now gripping his pistol. "You will be silent. You have caused enough trouble with your lies and manipulation." The tension in the yard ratcheted up dramatically as Bledsoe's soldiers reacted to their commander's increasingly erratic behavior. Several hands moved toward weapons, though it was unclear whether they intended to support or restrain their colonel. Major Harrison stepped between Bledsoe and Elena, his voice carrying the authority of years of command experience. "Colonel, you will stand down immediately. You are relieved of command and under arrest. Any attempt to harm witnesses will be considered an additional crime." Bledsoe's laugh was bitter and desperate. "Relieved of command? By whom? You have no authority here, William. I'm conducting a legitimate military operation to apprehend a fugitive." Actually, a new voice interrupted from the edge of the yard. "Major Harrison is acting under direct orders from Fort Concho." Elena turned to see another uniformed figure approaching, General Nathan Bedford, the territorial commander whose jurisdiction included Fort Richardson and all military operations in the region. Behind him rode a full company of cavalry, their weapons ready, but not yet drawn. Bledsoe's face went ashen as he recognized his ultimate superior officer. "General Bedford, sir. I wasn't expecting—" "Of course you weren't expecting me, Colonel," Bedford replied coldly. "You thought you were conducting a private operation to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. What you actually did was trigger an investigation that has been building for months." Elena watched in amazement as the web of accountability finally closed around the man who had seemed untouchable for so long. General Bedford's presence meant that this was no longer a local confrontation, but an official military action with the full weight of army justice behind it. General Bedford dismounted and approached the group with the measured pace of a career soldier accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Major Harrison, I understand you have evidence regarding war crimes committed at Fort Richardson." Harrison nodded formally. "Yes, sir. I have detailed medical records, witness testimony, and documentation of systematic prisoner abuse ordered by Colonel Bledsoe." Bedford turned to Standing Bear. "And you are the father of one of the victims?" Standing Bear's voice was heavy with grief, but clear in its conviction. "I'm Standing Bear of the Comanche Nation. My daughter Morning Star died at Fort Richardson after being tortured and forced to watch the torture of others. Her unborn child also died due to deliberate medical neglect." General Bedford's expression grew increasingly grim as he absorbed this information. And Miss Sandoval, I presume you can provide first-hand testimony about these events? Elena stepped forward, no longer afraid now that justice seemed finally within reach. Yes, General. I can provide detailed testimony about torture methods, unauthorized interrogation techniques, and the deliberate murder of prisoners through medical neglect. Bledsoe made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. General, these people are all conspirators attempting to undermine military authority through false accusations. Miss Sandoval is a known fugitive who has been hiding among hostile forces for 3 years. General Bedford studied Bledsoe with obvious distaste. Colonel, I've been investigating reports about your methods for the better part of a year. What I found suggests that you've been operating well outside military regulations and basic human decency. Bedford turned to address the soldiers who had accompanied Bledsoe. Sergeant Morrison placed Colonel Bledsoe under arrest for war crimes, violation of the Geneva Conventions, and conspiracy to murder military witnesses. He is to be transported to Fort Concho for formal court-martial proceedings. Elena felt a wave of relief so powerful that her knees nearly buckled. After 3 years of living in fear, carrying the weight of terrible memories, and believing that justice was impossible, she was finally watching accountability catch up with the man who had caused so much suffering. But General Bedford was not finished. He turned to the Whitmore family, who had been watching these proceedings with a mixture of amazement and concern. Mr. Whitmore, I understand that your family has provided shelter and protection to Miss Sandoval for the past 3 years. James stepped forward cautiously. Yes, sir. Elena has been part of our household. We found her to be honest, hardworking, and completely trustworthy. Bedford nodded approvingly. Good. Your protection of a witness to military crimes will be noted favorably in my report. The Army owes your family a debt of gratitude. Margaret found her voice. General, what happens to Elena now? Will she be safe from retaliation? General Bedford's expression softened slightly. Miss Sandoval will be placed under official Army protection while she provides testimony for Colonel Bledsoe's court-martial. After that, she will be free to resume her life wherever she chooses, with the guarantee that no further persecution will be tolerated. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the reality of her freedom finally sank in. For 3 years, she had lived as a fugitive from injustice. Now she would be able to live openly, without fear, without constantly looking over her shoulder for threats that might never materialize. Standing Bear approached Elena, his expression mixing grief for his daughter with gratitude for the justice that was finally being served. Elena Sandoval, you have honored my daughter's memory by ensuring that her killer faces consequences for his crimes. The Comanche nation will remember your courage. Elena looked up at the war chief, who had every reason to hate her, but had instead shown understanding and alliance. I'm sorry I couldn't save her, Standing Bear. I'm sorry my sacrifices weren't enough. Standing Bear placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your sacrifices were enough to ensure that her death was not forgotten, that her killer did not escape justice, and that other prisoners will not suffer the same fate. That is no small thing. As Colonel Bledsoe was led away in shackles, Elena turned to the Whitmore family who had given her shelter when she needed it most. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. You risked your own safety to protect someone whose true identity you didn't even know. James smiled warmly. Elena, you've been part of our family for 3 years. That doesn't change just because we now know more about your past. You'll always have a home here if you want it. Mary Whitmore broke free from her mother's protective embrace and ran to Elena, throwing her arms around the woman who had cared for her through so many small crises and daily challenges. You're not leaving us, are you, Elena? Now that the bad men are gone, you can stay and be safe. Elena knelt down to embrace the child who had become so dear to her, thinking of another young girl who had never had the chance to grow up safe and loved. I'm not going anywhere, little one. I'm finally home. As the sun set over the Texas plains, Elena stood surrounded by the unlikely family that had formed around shared struggles and mutual protection. The scars on her hands would always remind her of the price she had paid to show compassion in a cruel world, but they would also remind her of the connections forged through suffering and the justice that was possible when good people chose to stand together. Morning Star and her unnamed son were gone, beyond any earthly justice or comfort. But their deaths had not been meaningless. Their story, preserved in Elena's testimony and Standing Bear's grief, would ensure that other prisoners received more humane treatment and that officers like Bledsoe faced consequences for their crimes. In the growing twilight, Elena finally allowed herself to believe that she could build a future based on truth rather than carefully maintained lies. She had found family among strangers, justice after years of injustice, and peace after endless vigilance. The woman who had entered the Whitmore Ranch as Elena Vasquez could now live openly as Elena Sandoval, with all the complicated history that name carried. Standing Bear and his warriors departed the next morning, but not before the war chief had spoken privately with Elena one final time. "My daughter's spirit can rest now," he told her. "She knows that someone loved her enough to suffer for her, and that her death led to justice for others. That is a warrior's death, worthy of honor and remembrance." As Elena watched the Comanche riders disappear into the vast Texas landscape, she whispered a prayer for Morning Star and her child, thanking them for the strength their memory had given her during the darkest times. The living had obligations to the dead, and Elena had finally fulfilled hers. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer defined by fear. Elena Sandoval was free to choose her own path, surrounded by people who knew her true story and loved her not despite her scars, but because of the courage they represented. In a land where survival often meant choosing between competing loyalties and impossible moral choices, she had found a place where truth and compassion could coexist. Her hands would always bear the marks of what she had endured, but they had also become symbols of what was possible when someone chose love over fear, justice over safety, and truth over comfortable lies. The confession that had started everything, "They destroyed my hands for you," had become something more than a revelation of past suffering. It had become a testament to the power of sacrifice, the possibility of justice, and the enduring strength of the human spirit to choose hope even in the darkest circumstances.